It was the early days of television. I accepted it because I assumed it would be simply another job. I could never have predicted what would happen to us. I Love Lucy has been a source of unadulterated happiness for generations. There were lots of lights, lots of fun, and a cast that was like family. But that ideal image was destroyed when Vivian Vance revealed something before she passed away. For years, she had been carrying the truth, a reality concealed amid the fame, the rehearsals, and the laughing. Not only was her confession unexpected, but it was also unnerving. For what reason did she suppress it for so long? And what precisely did she ultimately acknowledge regarding one of the most cherished television programs? Stay tuned to find out. On I Love Lucy, Vivian Vance speaks up. As Ethel Mertz, the witty neighbor whose repartee with Lucy Ricardo became television gold, Vivian Vance was beloved by millions. She appeared to audiences to be the epitome of kindness, loyalty, and humor, the ideal antidote to Lucille Ian Ball's outrageous genius. One of Hollywood's most successful comedians, Vivian Vance, died on August 17, 1979, at the age of 70. When breast cancer eventually spread after years of fighting, she was left weak but always recognized for her unwavering attitude. She and her husband, John Dodds, who stayed faithfully by her side till the end, had peaceful days in California during her last months. The entertainment industry was inundated with tributes, with Lucille Ball crying as she recalled the woman who had supported her through heartache and victories, and Desi Arnaz describing her as a great friend, in addition to being a talented actress. An era came to an end with Vivian's passing. However, prior to her exiting the stage of life, she was careful to provide details about I Love Lucy that altered viewers' perceptions of the program for all time. Vivian was already engaged in her most challenging struggle when she started disclosing her confessions. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1973. Despite several treatments, the disease continued to progress. Her body was weakened by chemotherapy and surgery, but her soul remained strong. She kept appearing in public, frequently grinning despite her discomfort. However, those closest to her were aware that she was living with the awareness that her time was running out. She began to think carefully about her work and the legacy that had defined her as her condition deteriorated. Vivian's admission of how different the off-screen world was from what fans had anticipated was among the most startling. For many years, viewers thought the sitcom's actors were exactly like the characters they portrayed, happy, tight-knit, and brimming with sincere love. However, Vivian said that was a television-made illusion. Even though the actors were competent enough to create that illusion, the scene became far more complex once the cameras stopped. No one watching from home could have predicted the personal struggles, the studio-imposed constraints that made life oppressive, and the simmering conflicts. Much of that burden was on Vivian herself. She revealed that she frequently felt stuck in the Ethel Mertz role. It was exciting at first to be cast in such a breakthrough show. She gained notoriety, financial stability, and the respect of millions of people thanks to this opportunity. However, the very thing that made her renowned turned into a prison as the years passed. Fans got a unique glimpse of the price of comedy through her candor in those last years. Pratfalls, lines, and rehearsals weren't the only things involved. The sacrifices an actress made for a part that would both elevate and permanently limit her were the subject of the story. Although Vivian was always appreciative of the chance, she was also upfront about the cost of the on-screen laughs. Her on-screen marriage to Fred Mertz, which was tainted from the start, was the most startling truth she revealed. The battle with William Frawley in secret. When Vivian Vance initially joined I Love Lucy, she anticipated the opportunity to display her comedic skills in a role that would make her famous across the country. She was surprised to be matched with William Frawley, an accomplished actor who was over 20 years her senior in the role of her on-screen husband, Fred Mertz. She was shocked at the choice. Off-camera, Frawley was in his 60s with a rugged edge from years of hard life in Hollywood, while Vivian was in her early 40s, vivacious and gorgeous. She found the combination strange, even comical, and in a fit of rage, she remarked that nobody would think a woman like her would wed a guy so much older. That one comment served as the impetus for an ongoing dispute. Frawley, who was already known for his harsh tongue and short fuse, took her remarks personally. For the remainder of the show's run, he carried the resentment with him rather than dismissing it. From that day on, their professional relationship was characterized by a frigid contempt that permeated every encounter they had behind the scenes rather than warmth. On television, though, things were different. As the eccentric landlords of Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, the couple, Ethel and Fred Mertz, provide comedic relief. They were a popular television pair because of their teasing, arguing, and occasionally working together. Their relationship was adored by audiences who never realized that the laughter was a front for resentment. In actuality, there was a hint of realism in every statement said, every dispute acted out, and every instance of spousal discomfort they depicted. What fans perceived as staged humor frequently sprang from a reservoir of real annoyance. Their friendship never got any better behind the cameras. Sometimes directed at each other during practices, and other times murmured under their breath. The two exchanged scathing remarks. Frawley, who was known to be challenging and had a history of drinking, frequently increased the tension with hurtful snide comments. For her part, Vivian resisted giving up and had the wit to shoot back. The crew became used to the underlying animosity, and although most of them stayed out of the crossfire, they were unable to ignore the coldness that pervaded the set whenever Fred and Ethel had to share it. Both Frawley and Vance continued to be consummate professionals in spite of this. They realized that regardless of their personal grievances, their ability to act as a convincing couple was what made the show successful. That's exactly what they did. They quarreled with comic timing in front of the studio audience, causing everyone to erupt in amusement. They seemed to be a long-married couple whose squabbles were more loving than cruel. As they played off each other with accuracy, many people thought they must have been buddies in real life since the illusion was so smooth. Ironically, the facts couldn't have been more opposite. In subsequent interviews, Vivian acknowledged that the relationship was irreparable. Bill and I never got along. We really couldn't stand each other from the beginning, but we were actors and we performed our jobs. She recounted. The strange thing is that people thought our arguing was love, but it wasn't. It was the only genuine aspect of Fred and Ethel. She said that their humorous chemistry was a result of their hatred being channeled for the sake of performance rather than love. Even at times, their rivalry became well known within the crew. Frawley was known to occasionally grumble under his breath about Vivian in words that were too cruel to be uttered. However, Vivian herself once acknowledged in private that she feared situations that called for an excessive amount of intimacy with him. The professional facade was intact, but beneath it lay a bitter animosity that never went away. Their rivalry never ended in reconciliation, in contrast to other Hollywood co-star rivalries that cooled over time. Strangely enough, though, the tension might have enhanced their performances because Fred's obstinate responses and Ethel's scathing grievances had a genuineness that only genuine emotion could have. One of the most iconic comic combinations on television was born out of a casting error. A couple whose greatest moments were fueled by their tension, but for Vivian, the stress was genuine and enduring. Being paired with an actor who publicly disliked her added a level of difficulty to the already challenging role of Ethel that fans were unaware of. It was among the first riffs in the idyllic world of I Love Lucy, evidence that human connections could not be scripted, even when television history was being produced. If conflicting with Frawley was hard, it took much more effort to endure Lucille Ball's perfectionism. Let's hear what she had to say. Lucille Ball's life. Entering Lucille's world was both thrilling and overwhelming for Vivian Vance. She talked about working under Lucille's vigilant supervision in her interviews, acknowledging that Lucy was tireless. She could rehearse a scene over and over until the timing was so sharp it cut like glass. You couldn't afford to miss a beat with her. Vivian knew right away that playing Ethel Mertz would require more than just memorizing her lines. It was all about timing. Delivery had to be delivered with the perfect cadence, and physical comedy had to be done with accuracy. Lucille thought that everyone would be as dedicated as she was. According to Vivian, she was a real perfectionist. We would repeatedly perform that till the laugh came where she wanted it to if the rhythm wasn't there. For Vivian, who had made her name as a stage actor, this was an introduction to a brand new comedy that depended heavily on how well it was delivered. The pressure was heavy at first. Often, Vivian felt like she was rushing to keep up with Lucy's unrelenting speed. "I was terrified to death in those early days," she acknowledged. "I was just trying not to get caught up in Lucy's natural genius. It was difficult to play the straight woman to Lucy's ridiculous antics." Vivian noted that she occasionally found it difficult to strike a balance between grounding the situations and maintaining her personal presence. However, the tension gradually gave way to admiration. Through Lucy's determination and her remarkable ability to predict what would make an audience laugh, Vivian came to see the genius in her. In her own words, "You couldn't help but appreciate her. She had an unrivaled sense of humor. Even when it was difficult, being with her improved me." Eventually, what began as intimidation evolved into education. Additionally, Vivian gave Lucille credit for encouraging her to identify her own comic performance strengths. The partnership wasn't always simple, though. Vivian frequently felt overwhelmed by Lucille's exaggerated personality, which dominated the set. On certain days, she questioned whether she would always be relegated to the role of Lucy's sidekick, the unglamorous buddy who merely provided the backdrop for her jokes. She acknowledged, "There were moments when I felt invisible next to her, but then I realized that Lucy had purposefully given me that space so that I could shine as well." That's when Ethel got her turn. This recognition demonstrated the complex yet sincere relationship that grew between the two women. Lucille became to depend on Vivian for more than simply performances as the years passed. Vivian was the one who stood silently by her side, providing consolation without passing judgment. While her marriage to Desi Arnaz started to fall apart. In an interview, Lucille said, "Viv was my rock. I could trust her with anything. She was the one who steadied me when everything else felt like it was falling apart." The connection between the two co-stars, who started out as sort of professional rivals, grew closer than Hollywood anticipated. Vivian joined the inner circle of Lucille, family, not just a co-star. Outside of the studio, she frequently joined the family and spent time with Lucy and Desi's kids, acting as an aunt. Vivian referred to Lucille as the sister she never had in her parting thoughts, demonstrating the progress their relationship had made during those initial tense years of collaboration. Their relationship was based on conflict, respect, and eventually love. It served as a reminder that sincere connections could still be made in the high-pressure industry of television, where egos frequently clash. Vivian was aware of Lucy's outstanding qualities as well as her potential for difficulty. "I owe her a great deal." Even though this friendship turned into one of the most significant partnerships in her life, it was unable to shield Vivian from the harsh realities of working in Hollywood. She once remarked, "She challenged me, frustrated me, and inspired me all at once. Without Lucy, there would never have been an Ethel." The studio was in charge of everything else, even though Lucy may have insisted on flawless performance. However, friendship was unable to protect Vivian from yet another unpleasant reality. It would surprise you to learn about it. The strict requirements of the studio. In the 1950s, Ethel Mertz came to represent the ideal American housewife to millions of admirers. Practical, a little snobbish, and always willing to accompany Lucy on her escapades. Unfortunately, Vivian Vance had to pay a personal price for Desilu Productions to create the beloved image. In interviews, she disclosed that a large portion of what the public witnessed was not merely acting, but rather the outcome of studio directives that governed her identity, her attire, and even her anatomy. Her weight was the subject of one of the most stringent regulations. Desilu executives felt that Lucy Ricardo's sidekick needed to look less glitzy in order for her to stand out. "You have to keep your weight up so Lucy looks better. Can you imagine how that feels for a woman?" Vivian recalled bitterly, referring to a policy she really disliked. Although Vivian appreciated dress nicely and was naturally stylish off-screen, the filmmakers didn't want Ethel to be perceived as gorgeous. They wanted her to act as Lucy's antithesis. She said, It was humiliating during the discussion. I had to go against my gut since the studio wanted me to seem plain, even though I thought I looked better slimmer. Even worse, her cosmetics and clothes were specifically picked to support this shabby image. The stylish gowns and attractive hairstyles she cherished in her private life were no longer there. Rather, she was dressed with dowdy clothing and ugly cosmetics that was meant to make her look older than she actually was. I hated those dresses, Vivian stated plainly during the interview. What audiences believed to be just Ethel's character was actually a meticulously enforced disguise that deprived Vivian of her own identity. Every time I put them on, they made me feel 10 years older, and the wigs, the powder, they took away all the glamour I had. Off-screen, Vivian was renowned among friends for her poise and sense of style, loved fine clothes, carried herself with elegance, and relished the life of a woman who had spent years in the theater. So the contrast between her on-screen persona and her actual self was stark, making the transition into Ethel all the more painful. After long days of filming, she admitted that it was frequently difficult to look in the mirror. It wasn't me up there, she thought. It was someone the studio created, and I had to live with her whether I liked it or not. Despite her resentment, Vivian followed the rules because she knew that openly criticizing Desilu could jeopardize her career and that actors at the time had scant control over their portrayals. She explained, "You didn't argue with the studio. They told you what to wear, how to look, even how much you should weigh. If you wanted the job, you did it." Her words paint a vivid picture of early television, when even the stars of a hit show had little control over their own image. And the demands were emotionally and physically taxing. Sometimes she felt like she was living two lives, the glamorous Vivian Vance and the dowdy housewife Ethel Mertz, who stole her reflection. The pressure made it almost impossible for her to convince casting directors that she could play a role other than Ethel, which further exacerbated her dissatisfaction with being typecast. "They couldn't see past the house dresses and the apron," she bemoaned. "Even though that wasn't who I was, that's all everybody remembered." Despite the embarrassment, Vivian played the part with professionalism, finding ways to make Ethel funny and warm. Even when she didn't like the way she had to appear, it was a kind of silent revolt. Even though her appearance was controlled by the studio, she made sure that her spirit was visible. And even though viewers didn't see the full her, they could sense the passion she put into the role. If the image control wasn't enough, the demanding reality of live television added even more pressure, the weariness of live performance. Each episode started with table reads before going into full blocking rehearsals that lasted late into the night. Every gesture, pause, and pratfall had to be practiced until it became instinctive. As Vivian stated, "We sweated over every laugh." Vivian noted how difficult the process was. Nothing on that show happened by chance, despite what many people believed. The schedule was unrelenting. We practiced Monday through Wednesday. Camera blocking was in effect on Thursday. The live taping took place on Friday. It's like living inside a pressure cooker, according to Vivian. The fact that Friday's performance will take place in front of hundreds of people in the studio added to the intensity. This was not a practice run for safety. After the cameras rolled, there were no second takes. She explained, "You could hear the audience breathing with you. If they chuckled, it lifted you up. Your stomach fell if they didn't say anything. It's difficult to explain that kind of pressure until you've experienced it yourself." The audience's first response was cruel and exciting at the same time. Vivian acknowledged that she occasionally dreaded taking the stage out of fear that a joke would fall flat. But when it all came together, the sensation was unparalleled. Saying with pride, "It was like being on Broadway every week. You felt like you belonged with those individuals for a short while because the laughter and applause were genuine. It never really left you." However, this energy came at a price. The rehearsals were physically taxing, and scenes frequently required Vivian to run, fall, or react with an exaggerated expression while keeping her timing with Lucy. She recalled nights when she returned home with aches in her voice from constant projection. "The pressure to be funny is the hardest pressure there is. It wasn't enough to be good. You had to be perfect every Friday night." That pursuit of perfection demanded discipline, but also wore me down year after year. A single missed cue could ruin an entire scene, and that fear kept the cast on edge. The thing that made me famous also made me invisible. Vivian acknowledged that producers didn't see Vivian Vance, they only saw Ethel. Despite this, she never denied the pride she felt in what they created. The role of Ethel Mertz, so meticulously crafted for comedy, clung to her long after filming ended. Offers for new projects came infrequently, and when they did, they were often roles cut from the same mold. Despite all of the sacrifice and exhaustion, she admitted that the magic of the show came from those live performances. She said that it was thrilling and the hardest work of her life, but that one thing kept her going through the frustration and exhaustion. Let me tell you what it was. It was terrifying when the audience and cast shared something that could not be manufactured. In the interview, Vivian recalled, "I always felt like part of their family." Lucille Ball frequently invited Vivian into her home, and eventually she became an aunt to Lucy and Desi Arnaz's children, Lucy and Desi Jr. The children loved her, and Vivian loved the role. Vivian was there through the cracks that started to show in Lucy and Desi's marriage. Even though the glamorous couple that America loved was actually engaged in bitter battles behind closed doors. Those kids meant the world to me, and Lucy trusted me with them. This bond is impossible to fake. In subsequent interviews, Lucille herself acknowledged that Vivian was her rock and the person she turned to when her world seemed to be falling apart. She said that Vivian, who was frequently by Lucy's side during those years, became a quiet anchor, and that Lucy leaned on me during the hardest times. She could put on a brave face for the cameras, but at the end of the day, she needed someone who wasn't going to judge her. And I tried to be that person. Vivian was steady, patient, and fiercely loyal. She possessed qualities that enabled her to be more than just a co-star. Their relationship was more than Hollywood camaraderie. It was a sisterhood forged through the stress of both personal heartbreak and success. However, although she was a source of strength for Lucille, Vivian privately struggled with her own demons. Notoriety had brought her fame, but it had also brought her isolation. In one unguarded moment, she admitted, "The audience loved Ethel, but sometimes I wondered if anyone loved Vivian." She frequently felt undervalued, overshadowed by Lucy's enormous star power, and confined to the image of Ethel Mertz. It was as though I had vanished beneath her apron. Even while she reveled in the admiration of her followers, who knew her wherever she went. This sense of invisibility plagued her. Additionally, Vivian acknowledged that it seemed like being imprisoned in a room with walls that were constantly closing in. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to leave Ethel. Although she struggled to find new employment, she was rarely able to escape the industry. Although she rarely talked about her difficulties, she did admit to having depressing moments when she felt constrained by the demands made of her. In a quiet voice, she remarked, "People think you're living a dream, but sometimes it feels more like a cage." Friends later observed that she handled her suffering gracefully, rarely letting the public witness her weakness. The bond she had with Lucille, however, continued to be a lifeline in spite of these difficulties. Few people could comprehend how the two women leaned on one another. Lucy was one of the few who remained close to Vivian as her cancer struggle neared its end. In a rare instance of public sorrow, she subsequently remarked, "Losing Viv was like losing a part of myself." Aside from her career challenges, let's tell you how Vivian's personal life was a roller coaster of emotions and losses. Love, loss, and enduring legacy. Behind the laughter that made her famous, Vivian Vance led a private life full of heartbreak and resiliency. It was a tribute that highlighted the depth of love and respect between them, a friendship that had endured decades of work, fame, and hardship. She repeatedly acknowledged that although audiences knew her as the quick-witted Ethel Mertz, her real life was far more complicated. Her first marriage occurred before fame had touched her name, and in 1928 she married Joseph Danek, a union that seemed promising but lasted only 3 years. Her 4 marriages reflected a turbulent journey in search of stability and love, a search that mirrored the challenges faced in her career. Although Vivian rarely discussed this time, she later admitted that she was too young and preoccupied with her goals to manage marriage and career. The Great Depression had made life hard, and she felt that a traditional partnership could not satisfy her desire to pursue a career on stage. "I was restless," she said years later. "I desired something greater than my current existence. I wasn't prepared to settle, even though Joe was a decent man." Her 1934 second marriage to George Coe was another effort at home bliss, but it also fell apart after just 6 years. By this point, Vivian had established herself as a renowned stage performer and was well established in the New York theater scene. The relationship was severely strained by the demands of frequent rehearsals, travel, and unstable finances. The couple's friends saw that her increasing ambition ran counter to Coe's preference for a calm life. Later, Vivian thought, "I was hungry for success and it cost me the marriage. The theater consumed me." The most painful of these wounds would be her third marriage, to actor and theatrical manager Philip Ober in 1941. Although their union appeared stable on the outside, spanning the years of Vivian's greatest success with I Love Lucy, it was tumultuous behind closed doors. While she did not publicly discuss the details, Vivian once acknowledged, "It was a marriage filled with storms." Ober's career never achieved the same heights as Vivian's, and those close to her implied that his resentment frequently spilled into cruelty. Allegations of jealousy and abuse clouded their years together. In 1961, Vivian finally found what she had been looking for in John Dodds, a literary agent and publisher who appreciated her for who she was, not just for her fame. "I stayed longer than I should have, but in those days, women often did." Eventually, the marriage fell apart, leaving Vivian resolved to never again allow resentment or bitterness to dictate her private life. They settled in Stamford, Connecticut, and then California, where Vivian could maintain her connections to her coworkers while living a more tranquil life. She spoke lovingly of him in interviews, describing him as the type of man who walks beside you rather than competing with you. With him, she found the serenity and support that had eluded her in previous years. In her final years, Vivian battled breast cancer, a fight she fought with dignity and bravery. Her family paid tribute to her memory by donating her Emmy Award to the Albuquerque Little Theater, the stage where her journey had started decades earlier. Dodd remained by her side through her deteriorating health, proving himself a true partner until her last days. Vivian Vance's story makes us wonder, what is the true cost of bringing laughter to millions? It was a symbolic gesture that tied her legacy back to her roots, reminding the world that before Hollywood, Vivian was a passionate performer who had dreamed of a life in the arts. Comment below with your opinions on whether the cost of celebrity is ever truly worth it.